We were talking and that way, yes, that way she had the same schedule. Yeah.
Just gonna Oh, you're totally fine. You're totally fine.
You have to go to school to do that. We found out.
Before I finished it, it was around like 11:50. But then I wrote 2 more paragraphs, so I said today around 11:15.
Okay.
I know. Yeah, exactly. This is not real.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the celebration of youth and culture. It is day of presentation for Franco-American Fellows of the Eleanor Kirkpatrick Franco-American Fellows Program. We welcome you all here. Thank you for your support. Fellows in the room, please stand up for a minute for a good round of applause. Thank you very much. So, the Franco-American Fellows Program was established in 2010, and we're really, really happy to have in the room today a former chair for more than a decade, Ms. Cindy Shaw. The co-chair, Carolyn Shepard. The current chair of the program is in France right now, so Peggy Whittington. This program offers a really exciting opportunity to Central Oklahoma students. They get to experience life in France with a family, attending school there for a few weeks, and really able to relate to how life is conducted there versus here. They leave here with a plan for research, and they will be presenting the result of that research today. We must mention our partners. They're very important to us. First and foremost, the Kirkpatrick Foundation. Do we have anybody from the Kirkpatrick Foundation here? Also, the visionary woman of Oklahoma, and I believe we have Mrs. Thompson here from VAB. We also have a partnership with the Académie d'Amiens, who is not represented here today, but without whom memorandum of understanding, none of this would be happening. So
although we are now streaming live online, so we have some people
great.
Watching from France.
And of course, our partners of the State Department of Education, Ms. Kathleen Skate. Kathleen, would you like to say a few words?
I would just like to say how pleased we are to be able to support this program. It is amazing, and the visionary group who first went to make this happen, Barbara Thompson was included, and Jessica Dawson, Jennifer Robinson, who first made contact, Sandy Garrett, who was a part of that, and then we had partners also from and some other areas. So we are so pleased that this has continued, and that through our MOU, which I brought for you all to view in French, it is truly the premier program of our state and the world languages. We hope that we can replicate it with more languages and more students and more partners. So we thank you all for being here today, and to the students, we know this has been a life-changing experience for you, and we're really excited to hear how this has impacted you and will impact your futures. Thank you, and thank you to our wonderful Alliance Française partners.
Speaking of Alliance Française, we couldn't do this without the support of many volunteers and board members. Volunteers and board members involved in this program, please stand up. And of course, I'd like also to introduce our partners from Tulsa, Alliance Française Tulsa, who attended today. Now, every year we're sending some writing loans to France. And the only thing limiting the number of people that we send is funding. We are fortunate that we have generous donors, but anybody in this room can donate to the program. Private donation, corporate donation. Keep in mind, your donation contributes to this and many other events. So please give generously. And without further ado, Ms. Carolyn Chapelle.
Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to get to introduce this group of amazing students. I accompanied the fellows to Compiègne, France for 2 weeks and was fortunate enough to not only assist them with their projects and their research, but also to get to know who they are as people, and you as their families, friends, and community members get to witness today what they've come up with for their research. So I'd like to start off by introducing Miss Karina Chen and her research. Let's see, I have a lot of tabs open, so I apologize. And here we go. The slide before that, sorry. Voila. All right, Karina.
Madame, I have it goes in more depth on the paper. I have a QR code.
For the audience members, yeah. Maybe we can make it available afterwards.
Okay.
Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Imagine a classroom. Imagine your classroom. Now, if you were born before 1990, you might have imagined something that looked like this. Yes, the black and white effect is for dramatic effect. But if you were born between 1990 and 2000, you probably imagined this classroom. But if you're a student like me who was born after 2005, you imagine this classroom. Notice any changes? And if you're watching from France, welcome. And you probably imagined this classroom. But maybe if you were born today, first of all, happy birthday. It's your birthday on Earth. But your classroom might look like this. In a world in which technology is ever changing and continuously entwining itself in our lives, it's important to imagine what technology can do for our education and what technology can do for our future. Good morning, everyone. My name is Karina Chen. I'm a junior at Classen SES High School, and today I'll be presenting the role of technology in high school education in France versus the United States. We'll first begin with discovering what the differences are. Then we'll go on to discover why there are differences. And lastly, we'll find out why it even matters. First, what are the differences? So this, you see, is a picture I took yesterday in my philosophy class. You'll notice that all the students are on laptops, Chromebooks, and they're doing assignments. Some students are in the back, and those kids, their names are Trey and Noah. They're playing games on their cell phones. This is a typical classroom in America. And on the right, you'll see a French classroom. All the students are working are hardworking at their tables, doing their assignments. The teacher has written notes on the board and is helping the students as well. And no students have their cell phones out. In fact, I had to sneak a picture, scarily, I was very scared to sneak a picture in this classroom to present this photo to you. So you'll see that American classrooms are significantly more technology dense compared to French classrooms. And on to statistics. In France and in the United States, I sent out a poll on Google Forms and got 25 to 28 responses. You'll see that American students have a higher amount of electronic notes than French students. Electronic notes can be notes taken on your iPad or typing notes in your laptop. Also, French teachers teach more often on a board, on a written board. So that would be a whiteboard or a chalkboard, as opposed to American classes where they use a digital board like this TV right here. And lastly, you'll see that American students have a greater proportion of technology required in this classroom. Maybe that'll be communicating with your teacher through email or having your teacher assign homework assignments to you digitally. Now, why do we have this difference? Well, take a trip down memory lane into 4 years ago. And for many of us, the time 4 years ago might have been a scary phrase, because that's when COVID-19 hit the United States. But before COVID-19, France and the United States looked pretty similar in terms of their classrooms. Students were at their desks, they had paper notes, teachers taught on a whiteboard in the classroom. And the difference comes in after COVID. During COVID, the whole world shut down. And this is what our classrooms looked like during the pandemic. Oh, wait, this is the wrong side. This is what our classrooms looked like during the pandemic. So there may be some issues with that. Well, first, there are some differences after the pandemic. But how did we get there? Well, the United States invested over $275 billion, and this led to many positive changes. For example, students got their own personal devices. I got my own Chromebooks, and we had learning resources such as Canvas and TutorMe that allowed students to connect with their teachers and tutors across the world to improve their education at home. On the other side, France had minor investments into one-to-one digital systems. My host sister in France, she actually didn't have her own personal device, and her school didn't give her one. So she had to scrounge around and ask some relatives if they had any used devices. So it was much more difficult in France to adapt to this technology change, possibly because they had less funding. But the differences come in after COVID. France, they immediately pushed to return to in-person schools. Here's a quote from French President Emmanuel Macron. "We need the children to go back to class because there's a danger they'll be left behind. Learning gaps will appear and educational inequalities are exacerbated." Here's another quote by France's European Affairs Minister Clement Vin. "Let's not forget what makes us proud. No other country in the European Union has left its schools open as much as France has." And although this is a proud point for France, the proud point for the United States was how well we fared without in-person schools. The amount of funding that the United States poured into education during this period bolstered our one-to-one digital learning systems almost 30%. Basically, virtually all students at the end of the pandemic had their own devices and could connect to their educational institution. And this seems like a proud point for the United States government. On a White House briefing, they say that the U.S. seems to have fared better than many of its peers, indicating considerable resilience, at least in some communities. Now, after the pandemic, this is where we see the changes. We see the changes that America has gone straight back into integrating its technology into its in-person classrooms, while France has gone back to paper pencil notes and teachers teaching directly from the board. Now on to why we have these differences. Well, first, there's a cultural dichotomy. In France, one of the most significant things I've noticed in the classroom is just how beautiful every French student's writing is. It's truly incredible. And as I returned to the United States, I looked into more of that. And it's actually called La Honte. It's been so perfected and so refined over 60 years of history that it's even developed its own font name. That's how amazing the French are. And as you can see, each letter is written perfectly. And their paper consists of 3 lines in between each major line to space out the letters. On this paper, I also have some of the French La Honte printed out in font and the English alphabet system, and I'll pass this around. Now this system is very strict. As you can see, lowercase letters, they only go up to the first line, while if it's a longer letter or a capital letter, they go up to the third line. This is very strict. They implement it very harshly in elementary schools. Although they do give students freedom of handwriting in middle and high school, students usually stick with la honte because the teachers continue using it on the board. And the way that teachers teach it is very precise as well. And they're very holistic in their approach to teaching it. For example, after watching a documentary, I learned that French teachers in primary school actually have their students create an art project that resemble these letters. So the art teacher that I saw, he had his students draw a sheep. What does a sheep have? They have a lot of wool. And he asked the students to draw this wool using circular motions. And this taught them that circular motions, this helped them learn how to write letters like O or A that are very round and circular. And although many critics of la honte in France believe that it's too authoritarianism and it limits students' freedom, it's actually a proud point of creativity for the French government. They heavily emphasize the importance of creative freedom, and they think that teaching them cursive in la honte allows them another form of self-expression. And this is such an important part, an integral part of French culture that when you search up French penmanship education, you'll see articles like The Serious Matter of French Handwriting. And now to their American counterparts. When you search up American penmanship education, here is one of the results that you'll see. Handwriting is becoming extinct. And that makes sense considering most of my classmates' handwriting, including, admittedly, my own, looks like this. Almost as beautiful. And this is a concerning fact because since 2010, the United States federal government has removed cursive as one of the requirements for the Common Core standards for English curriculum. And as a result, we've seen a new crisis emerge. 70% of Americans struggle to read their colleagues' handwriting. 45% claim they can't even make out their own, and 30% say that their illegible handwriting would make them anxious about writing on a board in front of colleagues. This is debilitating to your normal functions in society, but it also reflects a deeper difference in the cultural dichotomies between France and the United States. As you can see through penmanship in their value of calligraphy in France, France values the preservation of tradition and cultures. On the other hand, America values advancement and productivity. But what does this mean, valuing advancement and productivity? Well, there's a very good explanation for this. Since 1950, when the Sputnik launched, Sputnik 1 from the Soviet Union, the American government changed their education to reflect this and increased their emphasis on science and mathematics in their public school education. What's the new Sputnik 1? You might have guessed, artificial intelligence. America is revolutionizing itself in artificial intelligence, and it seems to be taking over a large portion of our national GDP. And as a result, our nation has advanced itself to fit to this criteria. Now students are being pushed to learn coding in elementary schools and typing skills in elementary schools rather than cursive. So this is a really major reason as to why these different cultures have different roles of technology in their high school education. Next, funding. When we visited France, we had the wonderful and very fun opportunity to visit a cooking class. As you can see, there's 3 pictures with our wonderful Madam Shepherd in the middle. And this is part of the vocational educational training in France, or VET, that they provide. France, after you finish primary school and secondary school, that's about ages 6 to 16, you have 3 options for your educational pathway. First is general education. Second is vocational education. And lastly, it's technological training. This is one of the vocational educations that they provide free of cost to their students because it's publicly funded. And it was for students to learn how to become a chef or learn how to work in the hotel serving industry. And that's really great, as you can see, because it reflects the preservation of tradition and cultures. On the other hand, America, we have funding too, but what does it go towards? Well, it goes towards this. And that only further proves how we're going towards advancements in productivity. While France focuses on creating individual, unique, diverse pathways for each student, America wants to provide opportunities for students to advance themselves and improve themselves. Although football might have been a good joke for all of us, it actually has some great benefits. For example, you get physical exercise, learn leadership, and develop interpersonal skills. So you see that America, they're focusing on building their student population up altogether, while France is focusing on fostering individual qualities in each of their students. Next, we're going to talk about why this matters. So as we've seen more and more technology being integrated into schools in America, we need to evaluate what the impacts are on the children. Children as young as 6 years old are in their classrooms pointing iPads on a screen and learning from iPads. Well, what are the impacts of this? Some pros are that education is more accessible. As we've seen during COVID-19, students across the world who might not have had their personal devices got access to one. There's better teacher-student communication. For example, this year, our district had some snowy weather days, and they communicated that very effectively. Also, there's collaborative communication. There are online platforms that allow students to work in groups together, and this enhances their efficiency. And also, it's engaging. But while it can be engaging, online technologies in classrooms can be distracting. Allow me to remind you of the photo I showed you at the beginning of this presentation of my two friends, Trey and Noah, in the back of the class looking at their cell phones. This is a great example of how technology can be very distracting in class. Second is online propaganda. Although technology gives us limitless accesses to information on the web, online propaganda is just as rampant. Also, cheating. With the artificial intelligence, students across the world in France and America have reported to be using artificial intelligence to cheat. Although it's at higher rates in America because we have typed assignments, it's still prevalent in countries like France. And lastly, a more important problem, isolation. Through COVID-19, millions of teenagers and children across the United States, across France, across all the countries of the world experience a problem with isolation. But as we return to classrooms, that isolation hasn't exactly stopped, because now instead of staring at their teacher, they're staring at a screen. So what are the effects of technology on learning? So some positive effects include that research shows that growing up with technology provides a good motivation for these students because it engages them and provides classical conditioning to encourage their continuous learning. On the other hand, using modern technology could affect basic changes in psychomotor and cognitive skills. This includes using tools such as computers, electronic organizers, and navigation systems. And also pencil versus paper. In France, the obviously benefit of this is that you have beautiful handwriting, but also it's less efficient than typing on a keyboard, and you can't edit your mistakes if you're writing an essay. And to conclude this, we need to find the perfect answer. And the answer is always somewhere in the middle. We don't want all of technology and all of students to just be looking at their screens all day, but we also want to provide easier ways for our students to adapt to the world. And the answer is that technology should enhance learning rather than replace it. There are bits and pieces of the American education system and the France education system that we can take part of to improve holistically. So why does this matter? Well, if you're listening, and if you were born today, first of all, happy birthday. But you might consider opting for this picture, the one on the left, rather than choosing the one where you're by yourself. Before I conclude my presentation, I just want to give a huge thanks to the Eleanor Kirkpatrick Foundation for sponsoring our trip, and the Alliance Francaise for giving us such a wonderful opportunity that has let me learn so much about cultures and also about communication and leadership. Thank you all.
All right, thank you, Karina. Next, we'll hear from Evelyn Venture and her presentation about women in STEM. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Evelyn Minter, like the Trevor just said, but my project is called Women in STEM, France vs. America. So I have always loved math and science, so when it came time to decide what I wanted to be, I thought engineering was a good fit. I always got slightly irritated when someone congratulated me for wanting to be a woman in STEM, because being a girl had nothing to do with what subjects I liked in school. When I told people I wanted to be an aerospace engineer, I'm often applauded. On many occasions, people are genuinely excited for my future, but on others, the interactions made me feel like I have diversity hire written on my forehead. Through my project, I wanted to look at what different aspects influence France's gender biases and our own, and how this affects the STEM workforce overall. In the United States, the term women in STEM became popularized in the late 90s as people began to recognize the lack of women in science and math industries. Reports vary, but there tends to be a consensus that the percentage of women in STEM fields is somewhere between 20 and 30%, with the U.S. Department of Commerce claiming the number to be a grand total of 24%. To try to increase this percentage, the U.S. National Science Foundation popularized the term women in STEM, and it's now the backbone for various programs, camps, and scholarships. Programs like Girls Who Code, Million Women Mentors, Girls Start, and Tech Girls have clubs all over the country to push more girls towards science and math fields. I myself can attest to the impact of these programs. After my freshman year of high school, I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up, so my mom signed me up for a Girls Discovering Engineering camp at Oklahoma State University. Without a doubt, this week-long camp gave me the knowledge and hands-on experience to confidently say I was going to be an amazing engineer someday. When I started researching colleges, I realized the gender gap that I had never truly experienced in any of my high school classes was about to become very real. Most universities have on average 25% of their STEM degrees going towards women. All of these facts and experiences drove me to look at this concept from a new perspective in France. I stayed in Compiègne with a student in Seconde, and I was able to attend math, physics, and chemistry classes at the Lycée Charles de Gaulle. I observed the same environments I tend to experience in America. There was no distinguishable variation in the numbers of boys and girls in these classes or in their treatment. So I created a survey to understand what impacted these students when choosing a specialization. Why was the STMG, or STEM specialization, so heavily dominated by boys, with only 26 of the participants being girls? Out of the 26 students I talked to, 6 were interested in going into STEM careers, and 4 believed it may be a possibility. The majority of these opinions were primarily shaped by the students' own interests and their teachers. The students who had no interest in STMG tended to feel this way simply because they weren't captivated by the subject matter, or they believed the courses to be too difficult. This reasoning is similar, if not the same, as students in America. However, I believe there are some distinct differences in our respective scenarios. When talking to teachers in passing and to other students, it became apparent that Compiègne isn't as heavily focused on STEM subjects. My host father worked designing robots used to manufacture perfume, and he drove an hour every morning to Paris for a job like this. Compiègne mainly produces sugar beets and flours used to make canola oil. Because of this, many careers aren't inherently focused on STEM like the ones we see in Oklahoma City. This mentality carried over to the high school as well, with many students seeing math and science classes as a waste of time in comparison to their language classes. Despite this, there was a clear effort about the school to push more people, girls especially, into SSD. We went to France during Women's History Month, and their media center had a presentation on different women who worked in science and technology. This presentation included advice from the scientists to young girls. For example, Joanna Guillet is an engineer. She tells young girls not to focus on their differences, but on their skills, because at the end of the day, she is the one managing others to build commercial hydraulic motors, not the men. The showcase also had graphics depicting the scientific career opportunities within kindergarten for men and women. There was information about different career opportunities and the importance of each one. The showcase ended with information about how men and women both have the mental capacity to fill the roles. It's how women in STEM is just purely due to prejudice. Overall, there is very clearly a push for more women in these careers, which is also seen when talking to students. Everyone unanimously agreed something needed to change for more women to enter this workforce. Despite this indisputable fact, no one knew of a program or opportunity to help girls get involved in STEM. These students had never experienced such outreach programs that I see everywhere, though my opinion may be biased because I tend to look out for them. It was difficult to find the correct translation for my questions because the French students I talked to aren't familiar with our concept of women in STEM. There just isn't an obvious trademark associated with these programs. To further my research, I interviewed Natalia Munit, a postdoc at l'Université de Technologie de Compiègne. She worked in the biomedical and bioengineering laboratory. She explained how this university differs from many others in France and in America. 51% of their engineering students are women. This is drastically different from the 29% of women that occupy STEM careers in France. Units attributed this to their strong biomedical engineering program, which attracts 74% of the women in the engineering department. This prestige has attracted Munich herself, as she grew up in Brazil and went to university in Spain. Aside from the stellar programs and dedicated professors and the students at the university, there's a strong outreach program for girls in Compiègne. The week before I visited the university, they hosted a program where middle school and high school girls could come and learn about engineering. They had specific demonstrations to simplify complex topics while still allowing the students to grasp what they've learned. For example, they had an interactive model where attendees could look into different doors and see what exactly devices do for people and where they go. These girls could hold everything from a hip prosthesis to a pacemaker. The university is clearly making a conscious effort to attract more women, which has led to their continuous growth. I genuinely enjoyed this interview and subsequent tour of the labs and facilities because it made me look at Compiègne from a different perspective. It's a city trying to revamp its impact on innovation without leaving its residents behind. I could even see this when we spoke to the assistant mayor of Compiègne. She went on and on about how they are trying to pair change with their history and how it's bringing so many new diverse concepts to the region. France and America have both recognized the need for change and have put in time and effort to change this statistic. As a whole, this is a difficult concept to address because in many scenarios, there are opportunities for anyone and everyone to get involved in science and math. It's as easy as taking a class or picking a specialization. However, if there isn't support at the beginning of a person's education, it becomes more difficult to choose something challenging when there is an easier option available. Tackling this issue is easier said than done. Girls believe that STEM classes are too hard or that they don't belong in STEM career starts early on. One possible solution is for colleges in the U.S. to establish connections to lower-level schools, like the Université de Technologie in Compiègne used, to promote female engagement in STEM from a young age. When taking standardized tests in America, students can choose to share their emails and home addresses with colleges who will send them information about summer camps, scholarships, and post-high school opportunities. Often, if a student scores well in math and science sections, this information will be shared to them about specific STEM opportunities. Similar initiatives could benefit girls in France by providing them with chances to engage with STEM programs early on. While neither France nor America have found a perfect way to attract girls into the STEM field, my time in France has taught me the importance of persistence. The key to success for these programs is quality, consistent outreach. Prejudices don't go away in one fell swoop. It takes years and years of work aimed to protect minorities from discrimination because, unfortunately, this issue extends beyond just one of gender. Despite this, with continued diligence, there will be more workforce equity. I am sure of this because we, as a society, have acknowledged this issue to the point where it can no longer be ignored. No matter the country, these efforts to empower girls are indisputably important to broaden the perspective of math and science industries as a whole. It matters for the little girls who could become the next great inventors of our time. France and America are experiencing the same issues, but by combining their different tactics and mentalities for addressing this issue, we can slowly decrease the gender gap in STEM careers and further creativity and innovation. Thank you all.
Merci, Adeline. Next, we'll hear
about the separation of church and state.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Lopez, and I am a senior at Class SAS at Northeast. And as was said, my project is about the separation of church and state in schools and plans in America. Oh, wait. Sorry. Religion has been a big part of history, sometimes in good ways, but other times in bad ways. Many countries across the world have been influenced by history to adopt the ideal of secularism, which refers to the separation of church and state. Compared to America, France has an interesting interpretation of what secularism means and how it should be implemented. This sparked my curiosity and encouraged me to choose this as my research topic. To gain a better understanding of the ideal of secularism, I think history should be discussed. So I will first briefly go over some key moments in history that have to do with religion and secularism for both France and America. So first, in the 16th century, France was going through the French Wars of Religion. And during this time, the King of France, Charles IX, was Catholic, hence France was predominantly Catholic. However, Calvinism began gaining popularity, and by the 1560s, 1/10 of the French people had become Calvinists, or Huguenots, as they were called in France. In 1572, Huguenots gathered in Paris to celebrate the wedding of Huguenot leader Henry of Navarre and Margaret of Valois. And with the support of the mother of King Charles IX, Catherine de' Medici, Catholics killed thousands of the Huguenots who had gathered there. This is known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Later in 1598, Henry of Navarre became King Henry IV of France. With Henry IV being a Huguenot, most of the French people opposed him, and so he decided to become Catholic, saying Paris is worse. This shows how he was willing to give up his own beliefs for the well-being of France. However, he still kept his fellow Huguenots in mind and issued the Edict of Nantes, which granted the Protestants religious freedom. The Edict of Nantes effectively ended the French Wars of Religion. Although this isn't the only instance in French history where religion and state clashed, it is one of the most notable ones, and it was a glimpse of what secularism would become. During the 18th century, Enlightenment thinkers such as Voltaire, Diderot, and Rousseau began promoting secularism and individual liberty over religious dogma. Fast forward to 1881, the Jules-Ferry laws established free education, and the next year, the Jules-Ferry laws made education mandatory and secular by removing religious instruction and curriculum from public schools. Fast forward again to 1905, France officially became a secular republic with the law of the separation of church and state was passed. This established French secularism, or laïcité, a fundamental principle of the French Republic. The law guaranteed religious freedom with restrictions only to ensure public order. So now for American history. American history regarding religion and secularism is nowhere near as extensive as French history, mainly due to the fact that French is hundreds of years older than America. But there are still some notable things to mention. American history all begins with a desire for religious freedom. Settlers such as the Pilgrims and the Puritans came to America to run away from religious persecution from the Church of England and to seek religious freedom. Later on, in 1791, when the United States was in its beginning stages as a new country, the First Amendment to the Constitution was passed, which includes the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. The Establishment Clause prohibits the government from establishing an official religion or favoring one religion over another, ensuring the separation of church and state. The Free Exercise Clause allows all individuals to freely exercise and practice their own religion, ensuring religious freedom. Since the United States has been secular from the very beginning, there hasn't been an extensive amount of issues concerning religion or secularism. However, there is one occurrence worth mentioning, which is the Supreme Court case Engel v. Vitale in 1962. New York passed legislation requiring teachers to say a non-denominational and non-compulsory prayer at school. Stephen Engel, along with other families, sued the school board president, William J. Vitale, and said that the prayer went against their religious beliefs. The New York Court of Appeals ruled in favor of Vitale, and so the decision was appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that public schools could not say a prayer because it violated the Establishment Clause, even if the prayer is non-denominational and non-compulsory. Despite the vast differences in their respective histories concerning religion and secularism, both France and America hold similar ideals of secularism. But how is secularism applied to schools today? So, for my method. My goal with this project was to research how students in French and American public high schools perceive secularism at school. I decided the best method for conducting this research would be through a survey. Since religion can be a sensitive topic for some people, and through a survey, I can make responses anonymous. The survey consisted of 11 questions total, 10 being free response questions and 1 being a multiple choice question. Because my goal was to see how students perceive secularism, I felt it would be best to have free response questions so participants could truthfully and freely give their thoughts and opinions without being constricted to multiple choice answers and having to choose which one fits best. The singular multiple choice question was the only question that provided me with true quantitative data, while the data I received from the free response questions was more qualitative. So I was really intrigued by how French students would respond to the questions in my survey, where there's one major difference between secularism in schools in France and America. Students in France are not allowed to wear any conspicuous religious symbols, such as hijabs and large crosses, in public schools. This law ensures that laïcité or French secularism is upheld in schools. For the purpose of interpreting my data, I turned my qualitative data into quantitative data, meaning I sorted responses into categories to then sort to percentages. However, because I was interested in researching the perceptions of secularism, I will mention a few specific responses that were particularly interesting or different from the common responses. So for my first question, it was, what are the rules regarding secularism at school? And 100% of the participants said you cannot wear religious clothing or symbols while at school. Question 2, is there freedom of religious expression at school? 47.8% of students said yes, 39.1% said no, and 13% said somewhat. Question 3, is school strictly secular? 22.7% of students said yes, 63.6% said no, and 13.6% said somewhat. Question 4, how often do your teachers talk about religion in class? This was the only multiple choice question on the survey. The answer choices were never, rarely, every now and then, and often. 44% of students said never, 48% said rarely, 8% said every now and then, and 0% said often. Question 5. If your teacher talks about religion in class, is it strictly in a historical context? 100% of students said yes. Question 6. Would you say that secularism is a fair ideal? Do you agree with this ideal in schools? 66.7% of students said yes, 25% said no, and 8.3% said somewhat. The students that said no had interesting reasonings for their answers. Some of the responses are as follows. And it is written in French. I quoted what they said, but I will translate in English. So the first one, no, for me religion is part of our personality in which we should be able to show it. The second one says, I think secularism is useless. And the third one says, no, because it is used to stigmatize Muslims at the moment. Question 7. How much can you express or discuss your personal religion in school? 13% of students said never. 26.7% said with friends and peers. 26.7% said freely as long as students are respecting other religions and not forcing their religious beliefs on others. 13% said rarely or very little. 17.4% said as much as students want, and 4.3% said only outside of the class. Question 8. Is there religious discrimination in school? If yes, do you think the ideal of secularism influences it? 24% of students said yes, 8% said very little, and 68% said no. 87.5% of students who said yes believe that secularism influences discrimination, while 12.5% don't think it influences discrimination. Most students only answered with a yes or no, but some students share their thoughts in their responses. Here are some of those more in-depth responses. If someone wears a cross, we are less shocked than if someone wears a veil. A few jokes are made, but no insults for other. You remain respectful. It could be worse if people wore clothes representing their religion. I think there is more discrimination, but because of students. I don't think secularism influences it. In addition to my survey, I also made a few observations about secularism in school during my time at Lycée Charles de Gaulle, the high school my host sister attends. Students are allowed to leave school during lunch, and one day my host sister and I went to a nearby Burger King. As we were walking back to school after we finished eating, I saw two girls walking in front of us wearing hijabs. As soon as the girls reached the school gate, they took off their hijabs and placed them in their bags. While in class, I noticed that no girls were wearing hijabs, but I wasn't sure if it was because of the law or because none of the girls were Muslim. I was aware that France has a large Muslim community, but I thought it could be possible that there were not many Muslim students at this particular school. However, seeing those girls take off their hijabs before stepping into the school grounds proved to me that this law really is enforced in French schools. In contradiction to this, I saw a couple of students wearing small cross necklaces. Were teachers not noticing because of their small size, or were these small crosses somehow acceptable? As I looked into it, I realized that the 2004 law that banned religious clothing or symbols in schools specifically bans religious symbols that are conspicuous and holds exceptions for discrete religious symbols. I had been under the impression that no religious symbols were allowed whatsoever, but with this new information, I could assume that small crosses are considered discrete and not conspicuous, therefore they are allowed in school. So now for my findings from the responses I got from the American students. So before going to France, my French teacher, Mr. Harney, explained to me the law in France regarding secularism in school. I made the survey for the French students first, and so I created the questions with that law and knowledge in mind. When I came back to America, I decided to give American students the exact same survey so I could have a true comparison. But as I started sending out the survey, almost everyone who was filling it out was confused on what secularism even meant. This was already proving to me that there is a difference in the perception of secularism that American students have compared to French students. The same parameters were used to interpret the data from the survey for the American students. Qualitative data was turned into quantitative to calculate percentages, and particularly interesting responses were responses that were different from the common ones already mentioned. So for question 1, what are the rules regarding religion or secularism at school? Most students ask me for clarification on this question. Since rules regarding secularism at school is not something that is typically discussed in America, answers were too varied to categorize. Instead, I will list the responses given, excluding responses that are too similar to others. So we have, there are no rules. Teachers can talk about religion, but they can't force it. Religion is allowed to be discussed as long as it is not malicious or persuasive in intent. All religious practices are allowed. I have no idea. No prayer between students and teachers allowed in school. Basically, if it doesn't cause a significant disturbance, one can bring a Bible read, pray, etc. It is fairly lenient. Jobs and other religious items are allowed to be worn. Teachers are not allowed to speak on their own religious beliefs unless it is an answer to a question a student asks directly to the teacher. Question 2. Is there freedom of religious expression at school? 86.7% of students said yes, and 13.3% said somewhat. Question 3. Is school strictly secular? 13.3% of students said yes, 33.3% said somewhat, and 53.3% said no. Question 4. How often do teachers talk about religion in class? 40% of students said never, 40% of students said rarely, 20% said every now and then, and 0% said often. Question 5. If your teacher talks about religion in class, is it strictly in a historical context? 53.3% said yes, 26.7% said sometimes, and 20% said no. Some students shared some interesting thoughts in their responses, such as, sometimes it's in a non-historical context, for example, philosophy of religion. The book my class is reading in English is all about an abusive Baptist missionary in Africa and his family. The book states and taints Christianity as a hypocritical cult and a vehicle of sin. Every once in a while, a teacher may mention an activity they had that was religious in nature, like going to church or something. Question 6. Would you say that secularism is a fair ideal? Do you agree with this ideal in schools? 33.3% of students said yes, 40% said somewhat, and 26.7% said no. The majority of students share the opinion in their responses. These were some of the responses. Yes, but not to the point where it limits personal expression. Not necessarily. I think schools can offer religious services so long as they are not forced upon students. Secularism does have its benefits to the cultural expression, but the United States was founded for the pursuit of religious freedom, and allowing that in schools is crucial to the cultural integrity of our country, and it celebrates our many religions and cultures are recited. Question 7. How much can you express or discuss your personal religion in school? All students said that students are allowed to express or discuss religion as much as they want. However, some students said that although they are allowed to, they do not feel comfortable talking about their religious beliefs because of other students and feeling judged. Question 8. Is there religious discrimination in school? If yes, do you think the ideal of secularism influences it? 57.1% of students said no, 14.3% said yes but very little, and 28.6% said
100% of the students that said yes believe that religious discrimination in the school is influenced by secularism. Students also had interesting thoughts on this question, such as, there is not much religious discrimination in school, rather it's not discussed often enough for grounds of discrimination to be established. Very little. There was one time when an answer was only counted as correct if it took the secular view, and there have been teachers who will give a bad grade to students who talk about religion in a speech. Because I'm used to the environment at my school, I had to be more intentional with my observations. With my school being the most diverse school in Oklahoma, we have a lot of religious diversity as well. One of the observations I made at my school was that students really express or discuss religion, and I've never witnessed any major discrimination. One day, a group of friends came to school dressed in their religious clothing solely to represent their culture and religion for a day. Other observations I made were that we have a Christian club at school and that there is a student who wears a hijab at school without any issues. That's as far as my observations went, since the topic of secularism and religion isn't very controversial or problematic at my school. So now for the comparison. I found the data I gathered from each country incredibly interesting on its own, so I was really excited to see the differences and similarities of the data when compared to each other. So for question 1, what are the rules regarding religion and secularism at school? 100% of the French students have the same answer, so it seems to me that French students have a clear understanding of what the rules regarding secularism are at school. According to French students, the concrete rules in France are that students are not allowed to wear conspicuous religious clothing or symbols, and teachers are not allowed to talk about religion in class unless it is in a historical context. The answers given by the American students varied greatly, with some saying that they don't know if there are rules or what they even are. However, the two most common responses were teachers can't talk about religion and teachers can talk about religion but not force it. These two are somewhat contradictory, so this allows me to assume that the rules concerning religion in schools aren't effectively communicated or applied. France is clear and strict about their secular ideals, while America is unclear or vague. Question 2. Is there freedom of religious expression at school? Almost half of the French students claim that there is freedom of religious expression at school. The majority of the remaining students said that there's none, and the smallest amount of students said there somewhat is. The vast majority of American students claim that there is freedom of religious expression at school, with the remaining students claiming that there somewhat is. We can see a clear difference here between France and America. Many French students claim that there is no freedom of religious expression at school, while no American students said there isn't freedom of religious expression at school. Question 3. Is school strictly secular? In both countries, the biggest percentage of answers was no. However, in France, the smallest percentage was somewhat, while in America, the smallest percentage was yes. Personally, I felt that the responses from the American students were expected, but the responses from the French students shocked me. Secularism is such a fundamental principle in France, and it seemed heavily implemented at school. So I was shocked that so many students felt that school is not strictly secular. Question 4. How often do teachers talk about religion in class? The data from both countries was rather similar, with never and rarely being around the same percentage and every now and then being the smallest percentage. Although every now and then is the smallest percentage for both countries, it had a higher percentage of 20% in America compared to 8% in France. This shows that American teachers really do not talk about religion more than French teachers. Really do talk about religion more than French teachers. Question 5. If your teacher talks about religion in class, is it strictly in a historical context? 100% of French students said yes, which is significantly different from what the American students said. A little more than half of American students said yes, a little more than a quarter said sometimes, and the remaining amount of students said no. This supports what some of the American students said about teachers being able to talk about religion as long as they're not forcing it. One could also assume that American teachers don't abide by the secularist laws as much as French teachers do. Question 6. Would you say that secularism is a fair ideal? Do you agree with this ideal in schools? The majority of French students said that secularism is a fair ideal. The responses of the American students were more evenly split between yes, somewhat, and no, but the highest percentage out of the three was somewhat. American students like the idea of keeping church and state separate at school, but they want to be able to have religious freedoms at school as well. In this way, France and America are similar, since the French students said they don't agree with secularism, and they believe that they should be able to display their religion more. Question 7. How much can you express or discuss your personal religion in school? All American students said that students are able to freely express and or discuss their religion as much as they want. The responses given by the French students were significantly more varied,
and only 17.4% said that students could freely express and or discuss their religion as much as they want. This clearly shows that there is a lawful freedom of religious expression at school in America than in France. Question 8. Is there religious discrimination in school? If yes, do you think the ideal of secularism influences it? The data I gathered from both countries is rather similar. The majority of students in both countries said that there is no religious discrimination. However, the data differs with the second question. In France, the majority of students said that there is religious discrimination. The majority of students that said there is religious discrimination believe that it was influenced by secularism. But in America, 100% of students who said there is religious discrimination believe it is influenced by secularism. So now for my conclusion. Secularism is a fundamental ideal in France, and the French do a good job of teaching it and implementing it. Most French students agree with the ideal of secularism in school. While Americans appreciate secularism, it appears that they appreciate religious freedom more. From the data I gathered through my survey and through articles I read online about this topic, it seems to me that France's goal is for everyone at school to be equal, even at the cost of freedom of religious expression. On the other hand, it seems to me that America is more concerned with ensuring freedom of religious expression for all students. Although I immensely enjoyed my time in France, I would totally consider living in France. This project has made me appreciate the religious freedoms that America provides its people. I would like to thank Mr. Barney, my French teacher, for all his support and guidance through this project. And I would also like to thank the teachers that accompanied us in France for all their help and support while we were there. And of course, I would like to thank the Alliance Française de Oklahoma City and everyone involved with the Eleanor Kirkpatrick Frano-American Fellows Program for providing me with this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity of going to France to complete a research project. This is the best experience I've ever had, and it provided me with an immense love and appreciation for the French language, culture, and France as a whole that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Sophia Miller and her discussion of animal welfare.
Hello everyone, I'm Sophia Miller. My project is What's the Difference? Animal Welfare in the United States versus France. The relationship between humans and animals is a unifying trait between all cultures and different walks of life. The importance of animal welfare within the ethical and moral standards of individuals. One thing I have always admired about animals is how each individual creature has a personality of their own. Whenever an individual builds a relationship with an animal, they come to realize just how complex these creatures can be. Emotionally, they are complex, just as we are. One critical question that can be implied is, why do we care about the welfare of animals? After all, they're not human. Yet still, we have pets that we take care of. Some people even go the extra mile for their companions. This can be from specialty diets, comfortable food enclosures, and little boots for their dogs. One common factor that all of these things have in common is that they create a comfortable and safe environment for these animals. Whenever safety and comfort are taken away from an animal, it hinders its growth and can detrimentally affect the animal's mental psyche. Animal welfare is applicable agriculturally, personally, in animal management, and etc. Culturally, we have come from a long way from basic expectations of how to care properly for animals to a complex and natural way of understanding of what an animal needs to thrive. What is animal welfare? Animal welfare can be separated into these three main points: natural living, health and physical productivity, and emotional well-being. Beginning with the first point, natural living. This point focuses on providing a natural environment for animals to reside in comfortably and have the opportunity to perform natural behaviors. This can be as simple as providing a branch for a pet bird to being as complex as an elephant enclosure at a zoo mimicking the African savanna. While health and productivity implements veterinary care and provides the exercise that most animals require to be able to be prosperous in their health. Emotional well-being refers to the mental health of the animals. This need is typically nurtured by the use of enrichment tools and games for an animal to exercise their mind. Historically, in the United States, animals were considered property rather than companions. As time progressed, animal welfare standards began taking shape as organizations such as the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or ASPCA, was founded in 1886. The ASPCA was established by American Henry Bergh in his own effort to end animal cruelty after witnessing a Russian cart horse being beaten after falling from exhaustion. This moment would be key to the animal welfare movement. The ASPCA was the first humane society to be established in the Western Society during that period. This later transformed into legal protection of animals, focusing mainly on livestock to avoid animal cruelty during processing. Eventually, in 1966, the Animal Welfare Act was enacted. This law is primarily in the regulation of the treatments of animals in transport, research, and etc. The Animal Welfare Act paved the way for many other similar acts being implemented as the American standard. Acts such as the Pet Protection Act, the Humane Slaughter Act, and the Endangered Species Act, and more. Legal representation of animal welfare inspired many animal rights movements. These groups would further investigate and advocate for the treatment of pets and testing animals. Gradually, over the decades, there has been a shift in realization that has identified animals as sentient beings that are deserving of sympathy and care. This still remains true for the United States in modern times. The perspective of a modern audience is crucial to understanding the common standards and expectations that are agreed upon by varied generations. In my student survey, students were prompted to respond to a simple yet reflective question: what does animal welfare mean to you? As one student highlights in response, animal welfare encompasses the idea of allowing animals to live their lives as they would in their natural environments. Regardless of whether they're in captivity, animals should be allowed to behave as they naturally would. This statement is a wonderful adaptation of what animal welfare is meant to represent. Further into the survey, students unanimously agreed that animal welfare is important to the growth of society. And through a series of quantitative data, students responded to the following questions. Do you often contribute to any way of the welfare of animals? 82.2% agreed. How do you individually support the welfare of animals? Most mentioned that they do that through personal care, and so on. Another main question that was asked to the students is, do you believe organizations such as zoos, sanctuaries are ethically and morally responsible? More than half agreed that yes. And another prompted question was, do you believe that there could be improvement in this organization? 97.8% responded yes. They were then followed up with the question of, if so, which of the following would best improve the state of mentioned organizations? 97.8% believe that improved living space would contribute to this. Conclusively, the overwhelming majority of students agree that animal welfare is a critical standard as well as a personally practicing and advocating for the welfare of animals. Common sites for animal care and protection are humane societies and shelters. Most of these organizations are sponsored and funded by the ASPCA or Humane Society of the United States, while others, such as the Humane Society of Stillwater, are private organizations driven by donations and donors. An interview with the director of the Humane Society, with Jackie Ross Guerrero, who we see right there in the slides, states that in her 16 years of experience, she knows that animal welfare is not only applicable just to the well-being of animals, but also to those who adopt. I started this job to help animals, Jackie states. You're also helping the people that the animals go to. The organization also provides up-to-date vaccinations, spays and neuters, health checks, and microchips before adoption, allowing the new owner to transition into a new beginning, adopting a healthy and happy companion to take home. The shelter also provides enrichment through items such as slow feeder bowls, toys, scent training, and community interactions with volunteers. The volunteer base of the Humane Society of Stillwater plays a critical role in the success and prosperity of the shelter. With the support of the volunteers, the shelter is consistently being cleaned and the animals are continuously nurtured through healthy interactions. Because the Humane Society of Stillwater is a private, non-profit organization, they rely solely on the community for support. Despite the adversity of the situation, Jackie remains optimistic and extremely grateful for the support the organization receives from the community and its volunteers. She has displayed her passion through her commitment and perseverance to the health and well-being of the animals of the shelter. Animal welfare in zoos. In one of the student survey questions, participants were given the prompt asking if they believe organizations such as zoos are ethically and morally responsible. Most disagreed. When asked what improvements they believe could be made to these organizations, the majority responded that shelter space could be improved upon. In my own experience during a field visit to the Tulsa Zoo, I made my own personal observation with this information in mind. When visiting the zoo, the first thing I had discovered was a considerable amount of construction in process near the elephant exhibit. Luckily, I was able to interview Eric Lynn, a zookeeper in the Elephants in Africa department. During this time, Eric and his colleague had just finished their daily exercise routine with the elephants. He had informed me that the elephants were trained by zookeepers to exercise with incentives of hay, apples, and other healthy treats to encourage the animals to work on muscle and physical health. Lynn has worked with elephants for 11 years, but has been with the Tulsa Zoo for 25. When asked about the recent construction, he noted that there is an expansion being built for the elephants to have more room to roam and utilize their space to its full potential. This was able to be done because the Tulsa Zoo had become an independent organization in recent years, after being previously city-owned. Because of this newfound independence, the zoo had made various improvements to the enclosures and attractions at the zoo to aid the growth of the animals. Previously, I had also met another member of the Tulsa Zoo staff, a horticulturalist named David. Though his profession seemingly had no connection to animal welfare, his experience and curiosity with animals had actually provided fruitful insight on an outsider's perspective of animal care in the zoo. David mentions how, as a horticulturalist, he is required to be aware of what plants are being placed near enclosure spaces to reduce the risk of animals producing health issues as a result of foliage nearby, or the plants could be interacted with by the animals for enrichment or nourishment purposes. I'm friends with a handful of keepers here, he highlights. They're always vigilant, they always check the diets and monitor the animals, and can contact vets if needed. David the horticulturalist also believes that zoos provide the average person to come and learn about different animals and how they function. He believes that this experience humanizes the animals, allowing visitors to have awareness of the impacts humans have on animals. The statement showcases the benefits of learning centers at the zoos, and it also highlights the consistent improvements being made in zoological parks to be both educational and improving the integrity of animal welfare. The history of animal welfare in France also mimics a similar path as the United States in its progression socially, culturally, and through legislation. In the past, French citizens would also mistreat animals as they were seen as property of sentient individuals. However, through the influence of the writings of Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the Enlightenment movement, these influences began to advocate for better treatment of animals. Later in legislature, animal welfare would be mentioned in the Napoleonic codes under the context of property laws. Though it may not have been much at the time, the movement for well-being of animals began its path. In the 19th century, the French were inspired by the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or the RSPCA, and similar organizations began to take root in France. Similar to the American Acts, in 1850 there was a penal code implemented specifically for animal welfare. In the modern era, France has faced some challenges with animal welfare, and activists have advocated for animals in testing, agriculture, and etc. There is still change being made and improved upon. The results of the French student survey had both its similarities and differences. First of all, the initial question, is animal welfare important to the development of society, was once again unanimous in agreement. One notable response from the prompt mentions, animal welfare means ensuring that they live in conditions where their physiological, behavioral, and emotional needs are met, while minimizing suffering and promoting fulfilling lives, showcasing a wonderful representation of cultural connection and animal welfare. Animal welfare in shelters in French shelters. In 1843, a familiar story takes place on Parisian streets. Dr. Dumont witnesses a cart horse being mistreated and steps in to intervene. Dumont de Montaut later sent a letter to Gabriel de la Salle, the Paris prefect at the time, and this event was published in La Rédaction Agricole. And on October 5th of 1843, de la Salle signed the decree which prohibited coachmen and carters from abusing their horses with the handle of their whips. Later on, Dumont de Montaut, the supportive activist and over time was eventually founded as the Société Protectrice des Animaux, or the SPA. On April 3rd, 1846, the SPA was the first of its kind in France. But it was not the first in the world. The SPA still remains a relevant resource to the modern French public to this day. In my second post home with the Blanchard family, I was greeted by two intriguing little characters, Lychee, the cordial and charismatic short-haired cat, and Mango, the mysterious and elusive brother. When I asked about their cats, the family enthusiastically mentioned that they had adopted both their companions at the local SPA in Compiègne. Lychee and Mango were just kittens whenever they were surrendered together, not to any fault of their own, but just because they were not a right fit for their former family. Though, for the Blanchards, this was a wonderful opportunity to make an addition to their wonderful family. My host mom also remarked that they have only had the two brothers for a few months to almost a year. And at the beginning of his adopted transition, Mango had developed some behavioral issues. Or as Madame French would say, "Fais attention, il gratte!" This experience allowed me the opportunity to not only work on my vocabulary, but also left me some souvenirs from my trip back. Though a bit honorary, Mango, as time goes on, has improved his behaviors with the Blanchards and is quite comfortable in his family's home with his brother. The SPA also requires all adopters to assign a certificate of commitment to prove that they are capable of taking care of an animal. The SPA is also very diverse in the animals that they rescue and rehome, such as we can see in the slides. Not only providing shelter and adoption just to cats and dogs, the SPA also offers services for horses, chickens, and other common pets. Though similar historically, the SPA has made itself a name and provides a safe place for both companions and people to connect. Animal welfare in French news. In 1793, the Jardin de Plantes was the first zoological park that was established in Paris, France. Originally a botanical garden, it set the stage for other zoos to take root in France. Zoos eventually would become spectating parks for those intrigued by the new and fantastic creatures to come and see. During this time period, zoos were implemented for entertainment purposes for the public. This later evolved into the educational standard that France has today for the wildlife, aiming to educate the public on the behavior and science of different species, also advocating for endangered species and promoting awareness of conservation. The French government in recent decades has also improved their standards for the welfare of animals. These laws also require better equipment for veterinary care, enrichment, and naturalization of the parks. Comparatively, the cultural barrier between France and America is considerably similar in the field of animal welfare. Globally, there has been many efforts and perseverance in the name of keeping the integrity, healthcare, and well-being of animals. And progress is still being made not only in their own natural realm, but in France as well. Though there were some difficulties faced within my project that hindered me reach while in France, there was still plenty to learn culturally and I'm grateful to everyone who has supported the fellows and I throughout this journey. This experience has allowed exponential growth in my own language skills and cultural learning, and I have met many wonderful individuals and made meaningful connections as well through this opportunity. Thank you once again for providing and allowing me this honor of being a 2024 Eleanor Kirkpatrick Frano-American Fellow.
See, next we will hear from Mason Northup about released hope.
Good afternoon. I'm Mason Northup. I'm a junior at Cassidy, and my project is all about the bistro. When I think of France, the first thing that comes to mind is the food. Steak au poivre, escargot, baguette, the whole shebang. I've loved eating all of these French foods my whole life, as well as learning more about them in my French education over the years. When I was a kid, as you can see, I ate at La Baguette Bistro very often with my mom, so this topic brings me a great sense of nostalgia. When thinking back on it though, I found myself asking, what even is a bistro? When I think of France, the bistro presents itself as an icon of French culture, yet I cannot provide a precise definition or description of what a bistro really is. It remained a mystery to me over the years, as well as to many Americans. Upon traveling to France, though, I got to experience what a true French bistro is like, and now I can provide a more clear definition of what a bistro is. However, when in France, I noticed some discrepancies in the aspects of a French bistro compared to the bistros we have in America. In my presentation, I will discuss some of these discrepancies that I found, as well as many of the other new things that I learned about the bistro and French culture in general. Before I begin discussing the results of my research, I would like to give a quick disclaimer. I could not follow the intended direction of my project in France, as you can see by the title change of my project in the further. Initially, I had an aim to investigate and research a different facet of the topic of the bistro. In my French class at Cassidy, my teacher, Mr. Pardue, showed us a French news report that talked about the disappearance of the bistro in France. Basically, it had said that a number of bistros in France were having to close due to a recent lack of business. And this fact shocked many people, both French and American alike, due to the bistro's supposedly significant cultural value. Upon hearing about this, given my long history of the bistro, I became really interested in further investigating this subject. I wanted to both evaluate the true cultural significance of the bistro and discover the root cause of their disappearance. Initially, I had hypothesized that the bistros were closing as a result of a loss of tradition among modern French youth. Other cultural aspects that I've learned throughout my French education have demonstrated that in certain ways, the French youth do not often adopt the traditions set by their predecessors. I crafted my hypothesis around this observed trend and plan to base my research on that prediction. When I arrived in France, however, things did not really turn out as expected. In discussing my project with my host family, as well as other people I had met in the first few days, they all thought it was very bizarre. It appeared that most people in town had never heard anything about bistros disappearing anywhere. According to them, bistros are still everywhere and they have not lost any sort of significance in recent times. With this information and some suggestions from my host, Abdel, I was able to draw some inferences about why this is. The news report did briefly mention that bistros were disappearing at high rates in the countryside, which Compiègne is not necessarily the countryside, but it did say that it was happening everywhere in my defense. My guess is that in Compiègne, the bistro was still alive and well due to the nature of the city being, it was not extremely crowded, but it definitely did have a big enough of a population to support a number of bistros. My host also informed me that another reason behind their disappearance could perhaps be the large immigrant population of certain areas in France. In modern times, France has gained a large Islamic population from Middle Eastern immigrants. Due to their unique cultural traditions of these immigrants, they might not go to the bistro as often as other French people, according to my host. Furthermore, predominantly immigrant areas typically have a lower average income than other parts of France, and as a result, many of the people living in these areas might not have the means to consistently eat at bistros, causing a lack of business. Unfortunately, given the social climate of Compiègne, I was forced to change the direction of my project. But given the situation, I just decided to learn whatever I could about the bistro, evaluate its importance, and compare what I learned with what exists in America. First, I will talk about my prior experience in American bistros. I'll be basing my generalizations about American bistros on the two bistros that I've eaten at many times, which are La Baguette and Bistro 22, which unfortunately has closed recent times. Many people consider bistros in America to be like a fancier restaurant, and to some extent, that's true. Truthfully, I would really only go to these restaurants for special occasions, celebration, or if my mom felt like splurging and spoiling me. This feeling can be attributed to the quality of the meals served, as well as the resultantly high meal prices. When we do go to the bistro, it does give off this kind of vibe of being what I would call a nice restaurant. The lights are dim, the colors are dark, there are fancy tablecloths, servers in fancy uniforms, wine glasses, arts on the walls, and there's just overall this posh vibe when you go in there. These restaurants are usually on the quieter side, and eating there might give you a feeling of being classy. Like a normal restaurant, they have a menu that is filled with a number of appetizers, meals, and desserts. Most meals that are offered are French cuisine, and almost all of the meals that are definitely more upscale to our standards. Both establishments also have a bar with a wide variety of fine wine and other alcoholic selections for those who want to drink them. To me, the attributes that I've mentioned provided me with what I thought was a clear definition of a bistro. However, in America, sometimes other bistros don't really align with this vision. For example, if you know Szechuan Bistro, there's an entirely different vibe. They only serve Asian cuisine, and I don't think anyone would consider it a fancy restaurant. My guess about that is that some restaurants in America use the fancier reputation of the bistro to try to improve the image of the restaurant, but in fact, in reality, it's just normal. All in all, the bistro in America can be generalized as a nicer, usually French restaurant. In France, many aspects remain the same, however, there are definitely some stark differences. Another disclaimer before what I get into what I learned in France, I was only able to eat in 2 bistros during my time in France due to unforeseen difficulties getting around. My family did not really have the ability to take me to the bistro very often, and due to the fast-paced nature of our tourism days, I didn't really have an opportunity to sit down and really just eat in the bistro. But before I made broad assumptions about the bistro in general, just based on 2 locations, I made sure to run my findings by my host family, as well as other people that I met, to make sure that they were generally true for all of France. When walking into the bistro I visited in February, which is where my hosts live, the first thing I saw walking in was a bar. Not only did they just have a bar, but it was also the focal point of the entire restaurant. There was a woman working the bar who was making drinks for customers sitting in the crowded dining room in the back. When I looked at the menu, they offered a selection of appetizers or les entrées, main courses or the plat, and desserts. You had the option to order whatever you wanted a la carte, or you could order a 2 to 3 course selection where you could either get like an appetizer and an entree, or an entree and a dessert. All of the food on the menu would definitely be considered similarly fancy to the food that we have in American bistros in our standards. They offered meals, just common French meals such as duck à l'orange, steak au pois, baked chicken, paired with an assortment of appetizers such as fries with blue cheese. I really wish we could eat fries with blue cheese every day in America. For dessert, they offered some sort of parfait, as well as a chocolate mousse and a chocolate cake that I had that was very delicious. The menu was found on a chalkboard, and the server brought the chalkboard around to each table when people were ready to order. Though I will say that my host told me that they only did that for me because everyone else is a regular and already knew that they wanted. One significant thing that stood out to me was just the overall vibe of the bistro. The environment was completely different than the environment of American bistros. Instead of quietly eating their meals, people were nothing short of exuberant. I could barely hear my host sitting right across from me with all the lively conversations happening around me. It was almost like I was in the hallways of school with everyone in their small groups chatting away. While the look of the place was definitely very nice, I would not say that it exactly compares to the look of American bistros. It was definitely a little more casual with bright lights and light-colored furniture. The environment felt more welcoming for conversation overall. And speaking of East conversation, one important thing to point out is the presence of the bar. One difference that I noticed was that literally almost everybody eating at the bistro had some form of alcoholic beverage to drink. One detail that might emphasize the significance of alcohol in French bistros is the fact that I was eating in this bistro around 12:30 p.m. My host had told me that people were just on their lunch break from work and were ready to eat and talk with some of their friends in town. Despite the time of day and having to return to work, people were still drinking. And sure, having one drink might be expected, but there were multiple empty glasses on literally every person's table. Ears were red, noses were red, speech was slurred, languages were like, it was very crazy. And some people even struggled to get down the steps that led into the bar area without falling. As anyone can see, drinking alcohol is definitely a significant aspect of bistros in France, which is quite different from the bistros in America, where the bars would typically be empty throughout the earlier hours of the day. But I guess in France, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, which I guess would just be America. I will say that this did definitely make for an entertaining environment while eating lunch that day. As for the physical aspects of bistros in France, they are relatively similar to those in America. Given this similarity, though, it still felt so different to me when eating in the bistro in France. I believe that what contributes to this difference isn't necessarily the physical makeup of the bistro, but rather the culture that surrounds it. As for the drinking aspect, the French definitely value their alcohol more than we do, specifically their wine. Even though it might be a bit of a stereotype that all French people drink wine and eat baguettes all day, to an extent it kind of is true. The cultural surrounding alcohol in France gives the bistro this lighthearted, lively vibe that we do not see in American bistros. To them, going to eat at the bistro is nothing more than just a normal lunch or dinner outing. There is not really any idea of fanciness attached to eating the bistro. The foods that we consider to be high-end cultural food, French food, to them obviously is just like what they eat on any given day. The difference in culture, therefore, causes there to be a different bistro vibe between the two countries. It's not necessarily that Americans are doing the bistro wrong or warping the definition of the bistro. It's more that Americans just don't place the same level of cultural significance on bistros. In fact, La Baguette remains very true to French culture as it is by real Frenchmen. It's just that Americans don't utilize and view the bistro in the same manner that French people do. The bistro to the French is a place where they can go to eat but also have fun. As a result, it becomes kind of this cultural center where people all gather together to socialize. So just as the bistro stands out to Americans as an icon of French culture, it also has a considerable cultural significance for French people as well. Now, to circle back to my original question, what even is a bistro? Given all of my newly learned information, I still think it's difficult to provide an exact definition of what a bistro really is. To provide a basis for comparison, though, I will unofficially define it by comparing it to what we have in America. To me, the bistro is something like an all-American sports bar, just with a major difference in culture and, of course, minus the sports all-you-can-eat. Just as an American pub would offer wings and nachos with a Bud Light beer, French bistros offer both bourguignon with one or multiple glasses of red wine. People go to these places to have fun with one another, whether it be talking about their day, getting their minds off work, or celebrating some sort of fun occasion, all while being able to eat their country's specific specialties while enjoying a drink. Despite traveling to France to discover why bistros were disappearing, I ironically wound up learning the true extent of the bistro's cultural significance. And I can thankfully report back and confirm that the bistro is still relevant to French culture, and that bistros are absolutely alive and thriving. Thank you.
See? And now we will hear from Eva about the access and availability of fresh produce.
Hi, my name is Eva Shear, and I had the amazing opportunity to research fresh, locally grown produce in France and America this spring. Before I fully delve into my research, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank everyone who made my 2-week stay in France possible. It truly was one of the most amazing, crazy, and slightly chaotic experiences of my life. To everyone in the Alliance Française who worked to put together, chaperone, and plan the trip, and to the Eleanor Kirkpatrick Foundation, thank you so much for allowing me to take part in such a wonderful adventure. First, I'd like to give you some context for why I decided to research the value and accessibility of fresh, locally grown produce. Local produce in my kitchen is almost always non-existent, unless, of course, you count the occasional tomato from our pictured chronically dying garden in the backyard. Even then, you would have to risk eating weed killer that my dad accidentally sprayed over the garden if you had the mind to actually eat the tomato, at which point it would likely be more unhealthy and taste worse than what you could find in Walmart anyway. I had assumed before my project that between the difficulty in finding affordable local produce and, at least in my case, the health risks of eating homegrown food, most Americans rarely make the effort and take the time to support local produce businesses. The version of France that I knew before my 2-week trip in Compiègne could only be seen through Instagram filters and lessons in class. France, I had been told, took immense pride in the quality of its produce. Photos of vibrantly colored fruits piled in baskets at farmers markets taught me that the French value fresh local produce significantly more than Americans. And then when given the chance to research a topic of my choice in France, I saw an opportunity to discover whether or not the French really do value local produce more than Americans, and if so, how far that value extends. After deciding the topic of my research, I was faced with a difficult question. How exactly does one measure how an entire nation values any given thing in comparison with another nation? Judging how approximately 400 million people value local produce over the course of a 2-week trip is a daunting task, to say the least. So I decided that the most accurate method to collect data would be to combine field research in France with online research at home. The ability to conduct research in France gave me the unique ability to ask very specific questions and make my own judgments about things I saw. while online research provided me with data that encompasses all of France and all of America, rather than concentrating solely on Compiègne and Oklahoma City. I conducted my field research through interviews at local farmers markets in France, an interview with a local chef, and observations at a medley of different locations. After compiling my findings, I came to the conclusion that the French generally value local produce more than Americans, but still struggle to robustly support local businesses. Before delving into the specifics of my research, it is important to establish a singular definition of the word local, as it will be used repeatedly throughout this presentation. According to the fourth edition of Webster's New World College Dictionary, something that is local is, quote, confined to a particular space or district, end quote. The terms place and district, however, are very broad and shed little light to how close something must be to its place of origin to truly be considered local. And for the sake of consistency, and because there is not an exact formal definition of the word, anything considered local in this presentation was grown or produced within a 100-mile radius of where it was sold. That being said, I found that French citizens generally want to support local farmers, but often find themselves in financial positions that render them unable to buy local produce. Based on the results of a survey that I made and distributed to students at the high school I attended during my time in France, roughly 50% of French families in Compiègne and its surrounding towns buy all their produce from large grocery stores such as, in America, Walmart, Whole Foods, all those big grocery stores that you see consistently. About 30% of families in Compiègne buy local produce only occasionally. 14% were unaware of where their families buy produce, and only 7% buy local produce consistently. Students who took the survey said that the biggest advantages of buying imported produce from those big grocery stores are that it tends to be faster, cheaper, and more accessible than buying local produce. My observations largely supported the students' responses. I visited an outdoors farmers market in Compiègne with 5 different produce vendors. It was pictured in the middle of the 2 graphs on the screen. Only 2 out of the 5 stalls sold local produce, while the others sold fruits and vegetables that had been bought from one large company that bought imported produce from nearby countries. Prices at local produce stalls tended to be higher than those where produce had been imported, a trend that has become so prevalent in France that local farmers have recently been staging protests against the government. The unrest among French farmers stems from their anger at the French government for allowing imported produce to be sold at significantly cheaper prices than they can afford to match. Recently, after farmers set up roadblocks around Paris in protest, French President Macron agreed to set a floor price on imported produce, and farmers hope to see an increase in the number of people willing to buy local fruits and vegetables soon. While it has been difficult for individuals and families in France to support local farmers because of the significantly cheaper imported produce, some larger companies and restaurants have the freedom to buy locally due to larger funds. Lycée Charles de Gaulle, like many other French high schools, offers specialties to some students who already know what career they want to pursue. Lycée Charles de Gaulle is known for its cooking specialty and even has a functioning restaurant on campus. The cooking specialty students live on campus and work at the restaurant in the evenings when it opens to the public. I had the opportunity to interview the restaurant chef and learned that students grow their own herbs and that the chef buys local produce within a 100-kilometer radius of the restaurant. The school chef explained that he buys produce locally because he feels that it is his duty as an educator to teach certain values as well as more tangible skills in the kitchen. The importance of going out of one's way to support local farmers is a value that the chef and the administrators of Lycée Charles de Gaulle view as important enough to teach through example, even if it means spending more money and time than they otherwise might. However, it is not only the opinions of students and the school chef that support the idea that the French tend to value local produce more than Americans. During my time in France, I became used to seeing grocery store windows plastered with signs advertising local and organic produce, as in the picture on the left, I believe. I can't really see it. The fact that the majority of grocery stores use locality as a means to bring in customers further proves that the French value local produce. But the higher prices that mark local stores prove that buying local produce is not always a feasible option for French families. That is not to say, however, that Americans have comparably more access to fresh local produce than French. In fact, my research and observations suggest the opposite. I found that Americans generally try to support local produce businesses. As consumer demand for direct produce sales from local farmers has risen, so has its ease of access in recent years. Even so, American consumers are generally less interested or able to buy fresh local produce than French consumers. In an effort to keep my research consistent, I made an exact copy in English of the survey I gave French students and asked a large and varied group of my peers at Cassidy, which is my high school, to fill it out. According to the form, approximately 17% more families in America buy all of their produce from large grocery stores than in France, and virtually zero American families buy their produce solely from local vendors. While these percentages show that Cassidy families generally buy local produce less frequently than French people, one must also bear in mind that direct sales in America from farms to consumers increased by 24% from 1997 to 2007. Perhaps, then, it is the lack of accessibility of local produce rather than a disinterest in supporting local farms that is responsible for the contrast between France and America in local produce sales. The fact that 87.5% of Cassidy students who took the survey said that they believe buying local produce is worth the extra effort further supports the idea that Americans value local produce but are often unable to buy it. Consistent through both surveys were people's responses to a question that asked their reasoning for buying non-local produce. The majority of both French and Americans who took the survey said that the top 3 reasons that they don't buy local produce as often as they would like are that large grocery stores are significantly more accessible, cheaper, and faster than local farmers markets and stores. One Cassidy High School student explains that while they would like to buy more local produce, it ultimately comes down to how willing their parents are to drive further, look harder, and spend more money for better food. Like many families in France, the majority of American families would like to buy local produce, but find themselves unable to support local farmers because of prices, accessibility, and timing. Ultimately, France seems to show more tangible support to local farmers than America, but still falls short of the hopes of the farmers themselves. While France and America struggle to lend local farms the support that most individuals would like to provide, both countries are taking active steps to make fresh local produce more widely available, affordable, and accessible. The number of farmers markets in America has tripled since 1994 and continues to grow today. In France, President Macron's recent decision to aid local farmers by setting a floor price on imported produce should result soon in tangible trends towards a rise in direct sales from farmers to consumers. Ultimately, both countries value local produce significantly, and both are beginning to take steps that reflect their citizens' regard for fresh, locally grown produce. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of the students for presenting their research findings today. I was reflecting on my own participation with AFdOKC over the years, and I was talking to my family about it, and I realized that exactly 10 years and 1 day ago, I was presenting my research as a fellow. So getting to be here today is very special. I am extremely grateful to be able to work with this program and these amazing kids. So thank you so much.
And before we adjourn, I would like to introduce the honorary consul for France in Oklahoma, Mr. Grant Wilson.
I can't tell you how impressed I am every year with the presentations by these students. It's just absolutely incredible. And I sit there and I think back to when I was in high school, and I go, I'm not sure I could do this. I'm so impressed. And I'm so proud that Alliance Française, working with the Eleanor Kirkpatrick Family Foundation, has been able to provide this opportunity to students. I think we realize just how important the this is a debate going on in our state right now, just how important studying foreign languages is. I think people need to understand that when you study a foreign language, you're not learning the French version of English, the Spanish version of English. You're learning another culture. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein said a language is a way of life. And there is no better way to broaden students' horizons than to introduce them to other cultures through the language of that culture. And I'm so proud of what Alliance does. I'm so proud of our teachers in our schools who teach French and those who teach other world languages. And I hope that we as a society will embrace learning world languages so that young people can have these amazing experiences. So again, to all of the presenters today, wow, what a great job. It was just absolutely fantastic. Parents, thank you for supporting them, Alliance, and then faculty and staff at the schools, thank you so much.
And Grant, if I may add, thank you to everybody who came out to support the fellows today. We appreciate it. It's a beautiful day. We can enjoy the rest of the day outside, but thank you for coming.
And I want to say, Kathleen Skinner, thank you so much.
Yes.
Kathleen is the Director of World Languages here at the State Department of Education and made this space available. Cindy?
I'd also like to recognize we had on our teacher exchange, I believe some of those teachers are here today.
Oh, okay.
Who participated. So if you were a teacher who went as part of our program, in addition to fellows, we are now trying to send teachers to France, and I think they've had a benefit. And I'd like to acknowledge those teachers who are here today.
Please stand up.
Thank you so much. Yes?
Yeah, just my observation today, I learned a lot from these presentations, you know. As an example, the penmanship difference, oh my gosh, you know, I understand that the cursive that we try to do here in this, those guys become doctors and write prescriptions. Now I know why they look like that.
You're saying they all grew up with big cheap tablets like we did.
I also wanted to, and they just stepped out, but the leaders of our Jeunesse program at Alliance Française, which is for high school students in secondary ed, and Bryce, they just stepped out and they've done great work. But also, when you go back to your high schools, I know some of your seniors are graduating. Congratulations, all the best with your next endeavors in life. For those of you returning to high school and for the faculty members and parents of returning students, the Jeunesse program is an excellent way to stay connected to French language and culture here in Oklahoma City. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. We hope to see you at some of our events, and certainly till next year. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Right.